The morning light from three suns painted the metal corridors of the Galactic Defense Academy in strange colors. Cadet Dongwoo Park walked through the halls with steady steps, his black hair still damp from the morning shower. Around him, alien cadets of dozens of species hurried to their classes. Some had scales that glittered like jewels. Others floated in containment suits filled with gas. A few moved on 6 legs with clicking sounds that echoed off the walls. Dongwoo had been at the academy for 3 months now. He was one of only 50 humans in a school of 10,000 students. The other species watched humans with curious eyes, trying to understand these new creatures who had just joined the galactic community. Most aliens thought humans were weak. They had no natural armor like the rock-skinned granite people. They had no claws like the cat-like Felinians. They could not breathe poison gas like the methane dwellers. But Dongwoo did not feel weak. He felt curious. The academy floated in space above a green planet called Kepler 442b. Through the large windows, Dongwoo could see the planet turning slowly below. White clouds swirled over blue oceans and brown continents. It looked almost like Earth, but the trees were purple instead of green. Commander Vrex stood at the front of the briefing room when Dongwoo arrived. The commander was a Saurian, one of the lizard people who ran most of the galaxy's military. He was 8 feet tall with dark green scales and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. When he spoke, his voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Cadets," Commander Vrex said, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Today we discuss your next training exercise." The room fell silent. Even the gas-floating nebuloids stopped their constant humming. Training exercises at the academy were serious business. They tested how well different species could work together against real dangers. Professor Keth floated near the wall, her crystalline body catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the room. She was an Etherian, made of living crystal that could think and feel. When she was excited or worried, she glowed brighter. Right now, she was glowing very bright indeed. "The exercise is called Predator Response Assessment," Professor Keth said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We want to see how you react when facing a real threat." A hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a creature that made several alien cadets step backward. The thing looked like a giant black wolf, but it had 6 legs instead of 4. Its claws were as long as kitchen knives. Its teeth were sharp enough to cut through steel. Red eyes glowed in its skull-like head. "This is a shadowhound," Commander Vrex explained. "They come from a death world called Terminus Prime. They are perfect hunters. They work in packs. They never give up once they find prey." Dongwoo leaned forward in his seat. While other cadets whispered nervously to each other, he studied the creature in the hologram. He noticed how its muscles attached to its bones. He saw how its claws curved for gripping. He watched how its ears moved to track sounds. "The exercise is simple," Professor Keth continued. "You will be dropped into a forest environment. 3 shadowhounds will hunt you for 72 hours. Your job is to survive." A blue-skinned Aquarian cadet raised a webbed hand. "What weapons do we get?" "Basic survival gear only," Commander Vrex replied. "No energy weapons, no armor, no communication devices. This tests your natural abilities." Dongwoo pulled out a small notebook and began writing. The alien cadet sitting next to him, a 4-armed tetrapod named Ziff, looked over curiously. "What are you writing?" Sci-Fi asked through his translator device. "Notes about the creature," Dongwoo replied without looking up. "Body weight approximately 150 kilograms based on muscle mass. Leg structure suggests burst speed rather than distance running. Pack size of 3 indicates territorial hunting pattern." Zyf's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "Why do you care about those things?" "We just need to hide from them. Understanding them helps us survive," Dongwoo said. "If I know how they hunt, I can predict where they will go." At the front of the room, Instructor Goal clicked his mandibles together. The Mantian looked like a giant praying mantis with armor plating. His compound eyes could see in directions that hurt human brains to think about. "The exercise begins tomorrow," Instructor Goal announced. "Report to Equipment Base 7 at dawn, dismissed." As the cadets filed out of the room, Dongwoo remained in his seat, still taking notes. He drew diagrams of the shadowhound's anatomy. He calculated how fast it could probably run. He estimated how high it could jump. His training partner, Cadet Hyejin Lee, waited for him by the door. She was a year older than Dongwoo and came from a family of Earth military officers. Her grandfather had fought in the Korean War. Her father had served in the Space Marines. "You are not nervous at all," she observed as they walked to the equipment bay. "Nervous about what?" Dongwu asked, still reading his notes. "About being hunted by monsters that can tear us apart." Dongwu looked up from his notebook. "They are not monsters. They are animals. All animals follow patterns. If we understand the patterns, we can work with them." "Work with them?" Hijin stopped walking. "Dongwu, they want to eat us." "Maybe," he said. "But first I want to study them." The equipment bay buzzed with activity. Hundreds of cadets gathered supplies for various training missions. Most took standard survival gear: water purifiers, emergency shelters, basic medical supplies. Dongwu moved through the supply areas with a different purpose. He selected rope. Lots of rope. He took measuring tools and sample containers. He picked up a small field microscope and specimen preservation chemicals. Other cadets stared at his choices. "Planning to do homework while being chased?" joked a Felinian cadet with orange fur. "Something like that," Dongwu replied seriously. Instructor Gall approached Dongwu's station. The giant mantis head tilted at an angle that would break a human neck. "Unusual selections, human cadet," Gall observed. "Explain your strategy." "If I am going to be in an environment with new life forms, I should learn about them," Dongwu said. "Understanding leads to better survival decisions." Gall's mandibles clicked rapidly, which Hyejin had learned meant the instructor was thinking hard. Most species focus on hiding when faced with predators. "Hiding is one option," Dongwu agreed, "but not the only option." That evening, Dongwu sat in the human quarters reading everything he could find about shadowhounds. The academy library had basic information, but he wanted more details. He studied predator behavior patterns from dozens of worlds. He read about pack hunting strategies. He learned about territorial markings and communication methods. Other human cadets played cards or watched entertainment videos. A few exercised in the gym. Most tried to get extra sleep before the dangerous exercise. Dongwu kept reading. "You should rest," Hijin told him as lights out approached. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "Tomorrow will be interesting," Dongwu corrected. "How often do we get to observe apex predators in their natural behavior?" "This is better than any classroom." Hijin shook her head, but she was smiling. In 3 months of training, she had learned that Dongwu saw every challenge as a chance to learn something new. It was very human, she thought. Where other species saw danger, humans saw questions to answer. As the Academy's artificial night cycle began, Dongwu finally closed his books. But he did not sleep right away. Instead, he lay in his narrow bunk and thought about tomorrow. Somewhere in the biodome, 3 shadowhounds were waiting. They expected to hunt confused, frightened prey. They were going to be very surprised. The transport ship hummed as it carried 20 cadets toward the biodome. Through the small windows, Dongwu watched the massive structure grow larger. It looked like a giant glass bubble attached to the Academy's lower levels. Inside, he could see a thick forest with purple leaves and winding rivers. "Drop zone in 5 minutes," announced the pilot. A mechanical voice from the ship's computer. Around him, alien cadets checked their equipment one final time. A crystalline student named Reth glowed nervously, sending blue light dancing across the walls. 2 Felinian cadets whispered to each other in their clicking language. Everyone seemed scared except for the humans. Hijin sat next to Dongwu, reviewing a map of the drop zone. "The forest covers 50 square kilometers," she said quietly. "Plenty of space to hide. Plenty of space to explore," Dongwu corrected. He had his notebook ready and a sample collection kit strapped to his belt. "I want to map their territory patterns." The ship touched down with a soft thud. The rear door opened, revealing a wall of green and purple plants. Strange bird calls echoed from deep in the forest. The air smelled like rain and growing things, but with an alien scent that made human noses tingle. "Remember," Commander Vrex's voice crackled through the speakers. "You have 72 hours. The shadowhounds are already in the forest. Survive until pickup time." One by one, the cadets jumped down from the ship. Most ran immediately toward the thick trees, looking for hiding spots. Dongwu walked slowly, examining everything around him. He knelt down and touched the soil. It was darker than earth dirt and felt oily between his fingers. "What are you doing?" Heijin asked, keeping watch while he worked. "Soil analysis," Dongwu said, putting a sample in a small container. "The mineral content tells us what plants grow here. The plants tell us what animals eat them. The plant eaters tell us where the predators hunt." A howl echoed through the forest. It sounded like a wolf, but deeper and with a strange clicking sound at the end. Other howls answered from different directions. 3 voices, just as the briefing had promised. They are marking territory, Dongwu observed, writing in his notebook. Pack coordination call, probably establishing hunting zones. Most of the other cadets had vanished into the forest by now. Heejin looked around nervously. Should we not find shelter? In a moment, Dongwu said. He was studying the base of a large tree with purple bark. Deep scratches marked the trunk about 4 feet off the ground. Look at these claw marks. Fresh, made within the last day. The height tells us shoulder measurements. He measured the scratches carefully with a small ruler, then made notes and drawings. The marks were exactly what he expected from the hologram, but seeing them in person gave him new information. The way the claws had dug into the wood showed incredible strength. The scratches angled downward, he noted. They marked territory by rearing up on back legs and dragging front claws down. This behavior suggests confidence in their environment. They are not afraid of anything here. A branch cracked somewhere behind them. Both humans froze. Hyojin reached for the knife on her belt, but Dongwu held up a hand to stop her. He tilted his head, listening. The sound came again. Deliberate footsteps too heavy to be any of the other cadets. Something large was moving through the underbrush about 50 meters away. Dongwu pulled out his small recording device and pointed it toward the sound. First contact audio log, he whispered. Large predator approaching from northwest. Estimated weight 160 kilograms based on ground impact. Movement pattern suggests stalking behavior rather than direct approach. Are you insane? Hyojin hissed. Run! But Dongwu did not run. Instead, he climbed quickly up the marked tree, finding handholds in the rough bark. Heejin followed, her military training taking over. They reached a thick branch about 20 feet up, just as the creature emerged from the forest. The Shadowhound was even more impressive in person than in the hologram. Its black fur seemed to absorb light, making it hard to focus on. 6 legs moved with perfect coordination, each step silent despite the creature's size. Red eyes swept back and forth, searching for prey scent. Dongwu held perfectly still, but his eyes tracked every movement. He watched how the creature's ears twitched at different sounds. He noted how its nose tested the air currents. He saw how its muscles tensed before each step. The Shadowhound stopped directly under their tree. Its massive head turned upward, red eyes focusing on their branch. For a long moment, predator and prey stared at each other. Then the creature made a sound like grinding metal. It reared up on its back 4 legs, front claws reaching toward them. The branch shook as claws scraped against bark, but 20 feet was too high to reach. Frustrated predator behavior, Dongwu whispered into his recorder. Unable to access arboreal prey. Note the problem-solving attempt with rear leg stance. Intelligence level higher than initial assessment. The Shadowhound circled the tree 3 times, then sat down to wait. It was clearly intelligent enough to understand that prey in trees must eventually come down for water or food. Now what? Hyojin asked quietly. Now we wait and observe, Dongwu replied. This is perfect. We can study its behavior without danger. For the next hour they watched the Shadowhound. Dongwu filled pages with notes about its habits. Every few minutes it would stand and sniff around the tree base. It marked the tree twice with scent glands. Once it howled and distant answers came back from its packmates. Pack communication confirmed, Dongwu noted. Individual identification through vocal patterns. Cooperation maintained across distances exceeding 1 kilometer. The creature finally grew bored and wandered away, but it did not go far. Through the trees, they could see it settling down in a sunny patch about 100 meters away. It was still watching their tree. It is not giving up, Heejin observed. Persistence predator behavior, Dongwu agreed. But now we know its patterns. It expects us to come down eventually. What if we do not do what it expects? Using his rope, Dongwu began rigging a way to move between trees without touching the ground. It was slow work, but it allowed them to travel while staying out of reach. The Shadowhound followed below, growing more frustrated as its prey refused to behave normally. By evening, they had covered almost a kilometer through the treetops. Dongwu had mapped the creature's territory and identified 3 different scent marking sites. More importantly, he had noticed something the Academy briefers had missed. Look at its left rear paw, he told Heejin as they settled onto a wide branch for the night. It favors that leg. Old injury, probably. It changes how it turns and jumps, so now I know how to predict its movement patterns, Dongwu said. making final notes before darkness fell. Tomorrow we start the real research. Below them, the Shadowhound circled their tree one more time before finding a comfortable spot to sleep. It did not understand that it had just spent an entire day being studied by the very prey it was supposed to hunt. The roles in this exercise were already changing, though the creature did not know it yet. Dongwu smiled as he closed his notebook. Day 1 had been even more educational than he had hoped. Dawn in the biodome came with artificial sunlight that slowly brightened like a real sunrise. Dongwu woke first, as he always did. Below their tree, the Shadowhound still waited, though it had moved to a different position during the night. "It is learning, too," Dongwu observed, writing in his notebook. "Change position to account for wind direction. Shows adaptive behavior and problem-solving ability." Hyejin stretched carefully on the branch. Her muscles ached from sleeping 20 feet in the air.
"How long do you think it will wait?"
"Persistence predators can wait for days," Dongwu replied. "But this one has a pack to coordinate with. It will not abandon them forever." As if summoned by his words, a howl echoed from deeper in the forest. The Shadowhound below them immediately stood and howled back. The conversation went on for several minutes, a complex series of calls and responses. "Pack coordination call," Dongwu noted. "They are sharing information about prey locations." Another howl came from a different direction, much closer than before. Then a third from somewhere to the east. The sounds were getting closer to their position. "They are converging on our location," Hyejin said nervously. "Yes," Dongwu agreed. "But now I know where all 3 pack members are. Perfect for the next phase." Before Hyejin could ask what he meant, Dongwu began unpacking his equipment. He pulled out his rope and measuring tools. From his sample kit, he took several small containers and a sharp knife. "What are you planning?" she asked. "Field research," he said simply. "I have been observing them. Now I need to interact with them under controlled conditions." Using his rope system, Dongwu moved to a tree about 50 meters away. The Shadowhound followed below, frustrated by its inability to reach the moving prey. But Dongwu was not trying to escape. Instead, he was moving toward a clearing he had spotted the day before. The clearing was roughly circular, about 30 meters across. More importantly, it had several large rocks and fallen logs that could provide cover. Dongwu had spent hours the night before planning how to use this space. He rigged his rope between trees around the clearing's edge, creating a network of aerial paths. Then he began setting up what looked like hunting traps, but with a difference. These were designed to capture, not kill. The first trap was a simple noose positioned over a game trail. But instead of hanging it normally, Dongwu positioned it to tighten around a leg rather than a neck. The second was a pit trap, but shallow and lined with soft leaves rather than spikes. "You are trying to catch one alive," Hyejin realized. "For research purposes," Dongwu confirmed. "I need to examine one closely to understand their anatomy and behavior patterns." The Shadowhound that had been following them prowled around the clearing's edge. It could sense the traps, but its intelligence was working against it. The creature expected hunting traps designed to kill. These strange contraptions confused it. Dongwu climbed down to ground level for the first time since the exercise began. The Shadowhound immediately charged toward him, but he was ready. Using his rope system, he swung up into the trees just as the creature reached his position. The movement triggered his first trap. The noose snapped tight around the Shadowhound's left rear leg, the same leg Dongwu had identified as injured. The creature stumbled and fell, tangled in rope but unharmed. "Perfect," Dongwu said, pulling out his recording device. "Subject 1 captured for examination. No visible injuries from capture method." The Shadowhound thrashed and snarled, but the rope held firm. Dongwu had calculated the angles perfectly. The more the creature struggled, the more tangled it became. "Now what?" Hyejin asked from her position in a nearby tree. "Now I examine it," Dongwu said, climbing down with his measurement tools. "You are going near that thing?" "It is restrained," Dongwu pointed out. "This is the best chance to gather anatomical data." For the next hour, Dongwu documented everything about the captured Shadowhound. He measured its claws, examined its teeth, and studied its muscle structure. The creature snapped at him repeatedly, but he stayed just out of reach while taking notes. "Jaw pressure estimated at 800 pounds per square inch," he recorded. "Claw length averaging 15 centimeters. Muscle density significantly higher than earth mammals of similar size." The other 2 pack members arrived while he was working. They circled the clearing, howling in distress at their trapped companion. but they would not enter the space where their packmate had been caught. Their intelligence told them the area was dangerous. Pack loyalty confirmed, Dongwu noted, but caution overrides rescue instinct. Survival of the pack prioritized over individual members. After gathering all the data he could, Dongwu faced a decision. The exercise rules did not specifically forbid harming the Shadowhounds, but they also did not require it. He could leave the creature trapped, effectively removing it from the hunt, but that would not teach him anything new. Instead, he approached the trapped Shadowhound with his knife. The creature snarled and lunged, but Dongwu was ready. In one quick motion, he cut the rope and jumped back to his aerial path. The freed Shadowhound immediately fled, rejoining its pack at the clearing's edge. All three creatures stared at the human who had captured and then released one of their own. Their behavior patterns had no framework for understanding this action. Behavioral modification achieved, Dongwu recorded. Pack now recognizes human as neither typical prey nor standard threat. Status uncertain. The dynamic had changed completely. The Shadowhounds still followed the humans, but from a greater distance. They were no longer hunting. They were studying, just as Dongwu was studying them. Over the next day, a strange relationship developed. Dongwu would set up observation points, and the Shadowhounds would test them carefully. Neither side attacked the other. Instead, they engaged in what could only be called mutual research. This is unprecedented, Haijin observed as they watched the pack from their latest tree-bound camp. They are not behaving like predators anymore. Because I am not behaving like prey, Dongwu replied. I changed the rules of the interaction. Now they must adapt or fail. The pack had indeed adapted. Instead of direct hunting, they began demonstrating behaviors that seemed designed to teach rather than threaten. They showed Dongwu how they tracked scents, how they communicated across distances, and how they coordinated attacks. They are sharing information, Dongwu realized with excitement. Intelligent species often do this when they encounter something new that they cannot categorize. By the end of the second day, Dongwu had filled 3 notebooks with observations. He had mapped the pack's entire territory, documented their communication methods, and identified individual personality traits in each creature. More importantly, he had established something like communication with them. When he howled in imitation of their calls, they responded with what seemed like corrections to his pronunciation. You are teaching each other, Haijin said in amazement. Natural behavior for intelligent species, Dongwu replied. They recognize intelligence in others, even if the form is different. As the artificial sun set on their second day, the pack settled down near the human's tree, but did not attempt to wait them out. Instead, they seemed to have accepted that the exercise had become something entirely different from what anyone had planned. The hunters had become teachers, and the prey had become students. Tomorrow would bring the final day of the exercise, but already Dongwu knew that everything the Academy thought it understood about predator-prey relationships was wrong. The pickup transport arrived exactly 72 hours after the drop-off. Dongwu and Haijin climbed aboard with dirty clothes and tired faces, but their eyes were bright with excitement. Around them, other cadets looked exhausted and traumatized from 3 days of hiding from apex predators. How many casualties? Commander Vrex asked as the ship sealed shut. 0 casualties reported, the pilot announced. All cadets accounted for. This surprised the alien instructors. Usually, the Shadowhound exercise resulted in at least 3 injuries requiring medical evacuation. Some cadets never recovered psychologically from being hunted by apex predators. But as Dongwu settled into his seat, he was not thinking about survival. He was organizing his research notes. 3 notebooks filled with observations, measurements, and behavioral analysis. 4 containers of biological samples. Dozens of recordings documenting Shadowhound communication patterns. Cadet Park. Instructor Goal clicked as he moved down the aisle, checking on students. Report your exercise status. Mission accomplished, sir, Dongwu replied. I have completed a comprehensive behavioral study of the Shadowhound pack. Goal's compound eyes focused on the human with confusion. You were supposed to survive, not conduct research. I survived by conducting research, Dongwu explained. Understanding the predators made survival easier. Back at the academy, the standard post-exercise procedure called for individual debriefing sessions with traumatized cadets. Instead, Dongwu requested access to the academy library and laboratory facilities. He wanted to process his samples and complete his analysis while the observations were fresh. Professor Keth found him there 6 hours later, hunched over a computer terminal typing rapidly. Chemical analysis equipment hummed nearby, processing soil and tissue samples. The crystalline Etherian's body pulsed with curious light patterns. "Cadet Park," she said in her wind chime voice. "You missed your debriefing appointment." "I will attend after I finish my preliminary report," Dongwu replied without looking up. "The data needs to be recorded while my memory is accurate." Professor Keth moved closer to read over his shoulder. What she saw made her crystal structure flicker with astonishment. The computer screen showed a formal scientific paper with the title, "Behavioral Analysis of Canis terminus, a Study in PAC, Intelligence and Adaptive Hunting Strategies." "This appears to be graduate-level research," she observed. The subjects demanded. "Graduate-level analysis," Dongwu replied. "They are much more intelligent than your files indicated." Over the next 2 days, Dongwu worked around the clock to complete his report. The final document ran to 47 pages of detailed observations, statistical analysis, and behavioral interpretation. He included anatomical diagrams drawn from direct observation, acoustic analysis of communication patterns, and recommendations for updated threat assessment protocols. The report's conclusion challenged everything the Academy believed about shadowhounds. According to Dongwu's research, they were not mindless predators driven by hunger. They were intelligent beings with complex social structures, problem-solving abilities, and even basic teaching behaviors. Recommendation, his report concluded, shadowhounds should be reclassified from apex predator to intelligent carnivorous species. Future interactions should account for their capacity for learning and adaptation. Standard prey response protocols are inadequate for encounters with this species. Commander Vrex read the report in his office, his yellow eyes growing wider with each page. The young human had documented behaviors that the Academy's own xenobiology department had never observed. His anatomical measurements were more precise than official military intelligence files. "This is impossible," the commander muttered to himself. "No cadet has this level of training." But the evidence was undeniable. Dongwu had provided tissue samples that proved his anatomical claims. His acoustic recordings clearly showed the complex communication patterns he described. His behavioral observations were supported by detailed timestamps and environmental data. Professor Keth requested a formal presentation of the research findings. The Academy's senior faculty gathered in the main lecture hall, expecting to hear a simple survival story. Instead, they found themselves attending an advanced xenobiology seminar. Dongwu stood at the podium with quiet confidence, his presentation materials organized like a professional researcher. Behind him, holographic displays showed anatomical diagrams and behavioral flowcharts. "The common assumption about shadowhounds is that they are driven purely by predatory instinct," he began. "My research indicates this is incorrect. They demonstrate tool use, abstract problem solving, and information sharing between pack members." He played recordings of shadowhound vocalizations, pointing out the grammatical structures hidden in what sounded like simple howls. He showed measurements proving that their claws were designed for precision work as well as combat. He presented evidence that they had been studying him as intently as he studied them. "The exercise revealed a fundamental flaw in our understanding," Dongwu continued. "We classify species as either predators or prey, but intelligence creates a third category that transcends this simple division." The alien faculty sat in stunned silence. Instructor Gall's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of severe mental stress. Admiral Quan, the Academy's highest-ranking officer, leaned forward in his seat with growing amazement. "Are you suggesting that the Shadowhounds recognized your intelligence?" Admiral Quan asked. "Yes, sir," Dongwu replied. "By the second day, they had stopped hunting us. Instead, they began demonstrating behaviors designed to teach us about their capabilities. They were as curious about humans as we were about them." Professor Keth's crystalline body blazed with excited light. "This would explain the zero casualty rate. If they stopped hunting, the other cadets would have been safe even without knowing it." "Correct," Dongwu confirmed. The pack's attention focused on the subjects showing active intelligence rather than typical prey responses. The implications were staggering. If shadowhounds could recognize and respond to intelligence in other species, they were not the mindless killers described in Academy files. They were potential allies, not just threats to be avoided. After the presentation, the faculty requested copies of all research materials. Dongwu's field notes would need to be reviewed by the Academy's xenobiology experts. His findings could change how the entire galaxy approached first contact with unknown intelligent species. One final question. Commander Vrex said as the meeting concluded. Did you consider the exercise dangerous at any point? Dongwu thought for a moment before answering. No more dangerous than any field research expedition. The key was recognizing that we were dealing with intelligent beings rather than mindless beasts. As the faculty filed out, discussing the revolutionary implications of the report, Dongwu packed his materials with quiet satisfaction. The exercise had been everything he hoped for and more. He had not just survived an encounter with apex predators, he had established first contact with a new intelligent species, but there was still one more thing to present to the Academy. Something that would make his point more clearly than any written report ever could. 3 days after his presentation, Dongwu requested a private meeting with Commander Vrex. The young human carried a cloth-wrapped bundle under his arm as he entered the commander's office. The package was roughly the size of a football but oddly shaped. You wanted to see me, Cadet Park? Commander Vrex gestured to a chair with one clawed hand. His yellow eyes tracked the mysterious bundle with reptilian curiosity. Yes, sir. I have something additional to present from my field research. Dongwu sat down but kept the bundle on his lap. Something that may help explain human approaches to problem-solving. Commander Vrex leaned back in his chair. After reading Dongwu's report, he thought he understood human behavior better. Apparently he was wrong. What is it? The commander asked. Without speaking, Dongwu carefully unwrapped his bundle. Inside was something that made Commander Vrex's scales stand on end with shock. A shadowhound skull, bleached white and perfectly preserved. The bone structure was intact, showing every detail of the creature's anatomy. Great depths of space, Commander Vrex whispered. Where did you get this? I made it, Dongwu replied simply. On the third day of the exercise, the commander's mind reeled. The exercise had been monitored constantly. No deaths had been reported. All 3 shadowhounds had been accounted for at the end of 72 hours. Explain, Commander Vrex demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. Dongwu placed the skull on the commander's desk where it seemed to stare at them with empty eye sockets. The pack decided to test my research on the final day. One individual separated from the group and approached me directly. It was not hunting behavior. It was curiosity behavior. The young human's voice remained calm and scientific as he described the encounter. The creature came within 3 meters and sat down. It was clearly intelligent, but I needed to understand its physical capabilities better, so I proposed an exchange. An exchange? Commander Vrex could barely understand what he was hearing. Information for information, Dongwu explained. I demonstrated human tool-making by constructing a simple trap. The Shadowhound demonstrated its problem-solving by dismantling the trap. We spent 2 hours teaching each other. Commander Vrex stared at the skull. This does not explain how the creature died. It challenged me to single combat, Dongwu said matter-of-factly. Ritualized fighting is common among intelligent species. It was testing whether humans could defend themselves in direct confrontation. The commander's yellow eyes widened. You fought a Shadowhound in single combat. Yes, sir. It was very educational. Dongwu pulled out his notebook and flipped to the relevant pages. The creature deliberately handicapped itself by fighting on 2 legs instead of 6. It wanted a fair test of capabilities. Commander Vrex looked at the notebook pages covered with diagrams of combat positions and anatomical weak points. How did you win? Intelligence, Dongwu replied. I studied its movement patterns during our 3 days together. When it committed to an attack pattern, I was able to predict and counter its actions. The skull sat between them like an accusation. In 1,000 years of Academy history, no cadet had ever returned from a training exercise with a trophy taken from the test subjects. The implications were staggering. The other pack members witnessed the combat, Dongwu continued. After I won, they approached and examined their fallen companion. Then they helped me preserve the skull using natural forest chemicals. It was a mark of respect for worthy combat. Commander Vrex realized that everything the Academy thought it knew about predator behavior was wrong. But more than that, everything they thought they knew about humans was wrong too. Cadet Park, the commander said slowly. Are you telling me that you bonded with the creatures that were supposed to hunt you? Yes, sir. By the end of the exercise, we had established basic communication and mutual respect. The skull is a gift from the pack acknowledging successful first contact between our species. The commander stared at the skull for a long time. Its bone structure was perfect, every detail preserved with obvious care and skill. This was not the work of a frightened cadet trying to survive. This was the work of a researcher collecting specimens. Do you realize what this means? Commander Vrex asked. It means humans approach threats differently than other species expect, Dongwu replied. We study problems instead of just avoiding them. Sometimes this leads to unexpected solutions. Later that day, Commander Vrex called an emergency meeting of the Academy's senior staff. The skull sat in the center of the conference table like a white accusation. Around it, the alien faculty struggled to process what they were seeing. This changes everything, Professor Keth said, her crystalline body pulsing with agitated light. If humans can establish communication with apex predators, what does this mean for their role in galactic defense? Instructor Gull clicked his mandibles nervously. In Mantian culture, taking trophies from defeated enemies is apex predator behavior. It suggests humans may be natural alphas rather than prey species. Admiral Quan studied the skull with his large, bulbous eyes. As an Aquarian, his species had evolved from prey animals. The idea of bonding with predators was almost incomprehensible to him. The implications for first contact protocols are enormous, the Admiral observed. If humans naturally seek to understand and communicate with dangerous species, they could serve as ambassadors to worlds we consider too hazardous to approach. The skull became the center of heated debate. Some faculty members argued that Dongwu's success was a fluke, impossible to replicate. Others suggested that all human training should be restructured to take advantage of their unique approach to problem solving. But as they argued, none of them noticed the most important detail. The skull was not just a trophy or a research specimen. It was a gift from one intelligent species to another, acknowledging successful communication across the vast gulf that separates different forms of consciousness. The Shadowhounds had recognized something in humans that even humans themselves did not fully understand. Where other species saw danger, humans saw questions to answer. Where others saw enemies, humans saw potential friends. The skull sat silently in the meeting room, but it spoke volumes about the future of human integration into galactic society. The Academy had wanted to test human survival abilities. Instead, they had discovered humanity's true gift to the galaxy, the ability to find common ground with any intelligent being, no matter how alien or dangerous it might appear. Commander Vrex made his decision as the meeting broke up. The skull would be placed in the Academy Museum with full honors, marking the first successful diplomatic contact between humans and a previously unknown intelligent species. But first, he had to figure out what to do with Cadet Dongwu Park, the young human who had turned a survival exercise into a xenobiology research project and somehow emerged with a treaty of friendship with apex predators. 2 weeks after the skull presentation, the Galactic Defense Academy announced the most comprehensive restructuring in its 1,000-year history. The changes began in Admiral Quan's office, where he sat reviewing Dongwu's complete file for the 20th time. Impossible, the Admiral muttered to himself. One cadet cannot overturn centuries of established xenobiological theory, but the evidence was overwhelming. Since Dongwu's presentation, 3 other Academy research teams had requested permission to study his findings. The Galactic Scientific Council wanted copies of his recordings. Most shocking of all, the Shadowhound homeworld of Terminus Prime had sent a diplomatic inquiry about establishing formal contact with humans. A soft chime announced Commander Vrex's arrival. The reptilian officer entered carrying a datapad, thick with new regulations and protocol changes. The new training programs are ready for your approval, Commander Vrex reported. The Xenobiology Department has redesigned the entire curriculum based on Cadet Park's research methods. Admiral Quan reviewed the proposed changes with growing amazement. Where the old programs focused on species classification and threat avoidance, the new curriculum emphasized communication techniques and cultural analysis. The Academy was shifting from a purely military model to something more like a diplomatic training center. What about the other human cadets? The Admiral asked. Do they show similar capabilities? That is the most interesting development, Commander Vrex replied. We tested 50 human cadets with modified scenarios. All of them demonstrated the same basic approach: study first, then adapt. It appears to be a species-wide trait. The implications were staggering. If all humans naturally approached unknown situations through research and communication, they represented a unique resource for galactic civilization. Species that had been considered too dangerous to contact might be accessible through human intermediaries. There is more, Commander Vrex continued. The Department of Galactic Relations wants to establish a new branch of the Academy, specifically for human diplomatic training. They are calling it the First Contact Division. Meanwhile, Dongwu found himself transferred from standard cadet training to an advanced research program that did not exist a month earlier. His new assignment was to develop protocols for human-led, first contact missions with potentially hostile, intelligent species. His first project involved reviewing historical records of failed diplomatic missions, species after species that had been written off as impossibly aggressive or fundamentally incompatible with galactic society. The files made depressing reading, but Dongwu saw patterns that others had missed. They all made the same mistake, he explained to He-Jin during one of their evening study sessions. They assumed that aggression meant lack of intelligence, but aggressive behavior can be a sign of sophisticated territorial instincts. He-Jin looked up from her own assignment, a comparative study of human and alien problem-solving approaches. So you think these species could be contacted successfully? If the contact team understood their behavioral patterns, Dongwu replied. Most failed missions seem to have triggered defensive responses rather than actual hostility. Professor Keith overheard this conversation during one of her visits to the human research section. The Etherian's crystalline body pulsed with excitement as she considered the possibilities. Cadet Park, she said in her wind chime voice. Would you be interested in attempting contact with the Razor Coast species? Dongwu looked up from his files with immediate interest. The Razor Coast species were legendary in Academy records as the most violently territorial beings ever encountered. 3 separate diplomatic missions had ended in complete failure, with entire contact teams disappearing without trace. What makes them so dangerous? He asked. They attack anything that enters their space, Professor Keth replied. No communication attempts have succeeded. Most experts believe they are purely instinct-driven killers. Dongwu spent the next week reviewing everything known about the Razor Coast species. The records were sparse and mostly consisted of military reports from failed encounters. But as he read, familiar patterns began to emerge. They only attack ships that approach their planet directly, he noted to Hyojin, but they ignore vessels that pass through their system without stopping. That suggests territorial behavior, rather than random aggression. So how do you make contact with something that attacks anyone who tries to visit? She asked. You do not visit, Dongwu replied. You invite them to visit you. His proposal to the Academy faculty was simple but revolutionary. Instead of sending ships to Razor Coast space, they would establish a research station at the edge of their territory and wait. The station would broadcast scientific data about human culture and technology, demonstrating peaceful intentions through actions rather than words. This is unprecedented, Admiral Kwan observed during the proposal review. No species has ever attempted contact through passive invitation. Because other species think like predators or prey, Dongwu explained. Humans think like researchers. We understand that the best way to study something is to make it comfortable enough to reveal itself naturally. The proposal was approved on a trial basis. A small research station was established at the very edge of Razor Coast territory, staffed entirely by human volunteers. Dongwu was appointed as the mission's lead xenobiologist despite being only 19 years old. The station operated for 6 months without any sign of contact. Other species might have given up, but the human crew settled into a comfortable routine of research and observation. They studied local stellar phenomena, cataloged nearby asteroid compositions, and broadcast their findings openly on all frequencies. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, sensors detected an approaching vessel. Unknown ship, came the transmission in perfectly clear galactic standard. We have been monitoring your broadcasts. Your research methods are interesting. We request permission to observe your station. First contact with the Razor Coast species happened not through military force or diplomatic negotiation, but through scientific curiosity. They had spent months studying human research methods before deciding that these strange new beings might be worth talking to. The resulting cultural exchange revolutionized xenobiology throughout the galaxy. The Razor Coast species, who had been written off as mindless aggressors, turned out to be incredibly sophisticated researchers themselves. Their territorial behavior was actually a form of quality control, keeping out species they considered intellectually inferior. They were protecting their research, Dongwu explained in his report to the Academy Council. Species that approached with military vessels or standard diplomatic protocols failed their intelligence test. Only a research-focused approach could demonstrate that humans were worth their attention. The success of the Razor Coast mission led to a complete reorganization of galactic first contact procedures. Human-led teams began attempting communication with dozens of species previously considered impossible to reach. The success rate was unprecedented. 6 months later, Dongwu stood in the Academy Museum, looking at a display case that had grown considerably since his cadet days. The original Shadowhound skull now shared space with artifacts from a dozen successful first contact missions. Each one represented a species that had been written off as too dangerous or too alien to communicate with. "Impressive collection," observed a familiar voice behind him. Dongwu turned to find Commander Vrex approaching, his reptilian features showing something that might have been pride. The commander now wore the insignia of the First Contact Division, the Academy's newest and most successful department. "It all started with 3 days in a forest," Dongwu replied, looking back at the skull that had changed everything. "No," Commander Vrex corrected. "It started with a human who saw predators and thought research opportunity instead of mortal danger." As they stood looking at the display, other cadets gathered around them. Humans and aliens together, all training in the new diplomatic protocols that Dongwu's research had made possible. The Academy had evolved from a military training center into something unprecedented, a school for interspecies understanding. The Shadowhound skull sat in its place of honor, no longer just a trophy or research specimen. It had become a symbol of humanity's greatest gift to galactic civilization, the ability to find common ground with any intelligent being, no matter how alien or dangerous it might initially appear. And in a small research station on the edge of Razor Coast space, human and alien scientists worked side by side, studying the universe together and proving that intelligence, not force, was the key to unlocking the galaxy's greatest mysteries. The exercise that was meant to test human survival skills had instead revealed humanity's true purpose among the stars, not as conquerors or even protectors, but as the bridge builders who could connect every form of consciousness in the galaxy through the universal language of curiosity and respect.